from Kildare Library Service. Thank you for joining us. I'm Shell. I work in the Thai library. I do the story times over there, so some of you might know me. We're joined by a little guest today. This is a little Scots Gaelic dog, Dolly, and she's joining us for story time today and keeping us company, because what we're saying is stories that are linked to Scotland too. So I'm going to be telling you stories about Irish fairy tales and Irish legends. I'm going to be telling you the story about a little story about Fionn McCool. Have you ever had a friend, or have you ever felt like sometimes you could be afraid of dogs? Did you ever get that feeling over you when you're near a dog that you're afraid of that dog? Or you seen little boys or little girls who might be afraid of dogs? What happens to them? Do you feel like that they go white in the face, that their hair stands on end, that they're just sweating, that they're shaking, that they're running down the road and the dog is chasing after them? Did you ever see that happening? I'm going to be telling you the story about a little Irish boy, and he was afraid of dogs. When this little boy was born, which was 1300 years ago in Ireland, because this story has been passed down for 1300 years by the fireside in people's homes, and there would be a local storyteller, or their daddies might tell them the story by the fire, and these are Irish legends that has been told in schools. Your parents might have been told it. I don't know if your teacher told them. But when this little boy was born, he had the biggest hands a mammy had ever seen in her life. She had had daughters, and this was her son. But I thought, oh my God, my son has such big hands. I think he's going to be an Irish warrior. I think he's going to be fantastic. I think he's going to be relied on, and a good, hardy Irish man. I'm going to call him Fionn McCool. So when Fionn McCool grew up to be a little boy, his mammy put him onto the hurling field, and by God, that lad could hit a slitter with that hurling, not a bother to him. He'd be centre forward and he'd win the matches, and it made him a very popular bookie in Ireland, I can tell you. He'd go up to Ulster, Munster, Connacht and Leinster, travelling the land for those matches, and he made so many friends. He was a very, very popular boy. He used to go fishing at night with his daddy. His daddy would teach him to fish. And when he grew up a little bit himself and he could do the fishing himself, he decided that he'd spend a little bit of time looking around the rivers of Ireland, seeing where the best fishing was. And it was a great thing for a boy to be lost in Ireland, because you'd have so much freedom. And he would have made friends with the fairy people, the fairy folk, the good people in Ireland. And one of those fairies was Fairy Cleena. She was his very, very best friend. And they would get together, they'd see each other coming and run along and hug when they'd meet. And they would skip along and they'd fish in the rivers of Ireland until the moon came out, which is the best time to fish. And then they'd go back to the campfire, and they would sing songs, and the fairy folk would dance all night, and they'd have a great roaring Irish time in Ireland. And he'd go home the next day and he'd tell his mammy all about the stories about the fairy folk and the friends that he met there. So when he grew up a little bit to be an older man, Cleena noticed one day when they were out in the fields and decided to trudge across the fields. They were looking for frog spawn one spring, and a dog jumped out from a local farmyard, because everybody had their home in the middle of the fields then. There wasn't built up villages. And out of this farmyard, a sheepdog came running out, and what did Fionn McCool do? He went white in the face, his hair stood up on end, he shook, and he was sweating the river Liffey from his top lip. He was sweating that much. And what did Cleena do? She calmed them down. She just went like that. Hug yourselves, guys, and just hug and just hug. And you have to be calm, and dogs love calm because they'll chase after when you're in. So just try and hug your friends when they're afraid of dogs and go, it's okay, just be calm, or hug yourself like this if you're afraid of dogs. So he was very careful, and it'd make him fierce angry, because when someone's afraid they can get angry and they'd go, get that dog away from me, get the dog. And it wasn't like him at all, it was just a fear talking. So every few months he'd go visiting his friend, the fairy Cleena. She'd be so happy to see him. And then one time, it was 6 months before Cleena realised she hadn't seen her friend, and she was looking for him. And she started talking to her other friends, and she says, where is my Fionn? Where is he? I'd love to see that boy. He's my love. He makes me happy. He makes me sing. We dance all night. We fish all night. We sing by the campfire. Where is he? And she kept talking and talking about him and talking and talking about him. Her daddy couldn't stand it any longer, and he gave her permission to walk onto the land of the living as a human being and see where Fionn had gone, if it was going to make her happy. So when she walked along to his mother's house, and his mother wasn't there. She looked through the window and she could see Fionn sitting by the fireside. She could see Fionn standing there, and she was about to call his name, and then suddenly there was a young woman with a baby in her arms came up behind Fionn and gave him a kiss on the cheek. She could see the sparkle by the fire from the fireside of brand new wedding rings on both their fingers. Fionn had gotten married. She didn't know what to say. She turned around from the window and refused to look, and she walked so slowly down to the end of the path. She reached his gate to head home, and she turned around very, very quickly, furious, ran up to the window, and she whispered an Irish curse, and she cursed the woman and the child that when Fionn left for fishing that night, that they would turn into Fionn's most fear, the biggest fear he had. And what was that? The biggest, giantest dogs in Ireland, that they would turn into 2 Irish wolfhounds. And when Fionn went out fishing and he caught the dinner and he brought it back home, so proud to show his new wife, when he walked in through the door, his legs went beneath him, for inside his own house was the biggest, greyest, giant dogs a man had ever seen in his life. He was afraid of dogs. He ran down the path to the gate, and the 2 dogs chased after him. He ran across the field, and the 2 dogs chased after him. He jumped over the local river, thinking that they wouldn't get it, but they had the longest legs in Ireland. They had longer legs than Fionn McCool himself, and jumped over the river after him. He called for the Fianna to help him. Help me, these dogs won't leave me alone. And the Fianna came along and petted the dogs, for they were as meek as lambs. They were so quiet. It's just the 2 dogs were in love with Fionn, and they didn't want to leave him. When you pet a dog like this, Diarmid, who was in the Fianna, just held the dog in his arms like this, and he goes, Fionn, what's wrong with you? These dogs are as meek as mice. They're so nice. Come and pet them. And Fionn would have nothing to do with them, nothing to do with the dogs. The next day he got up early and he went hunting up in the hills, Ulster, Munster, Connacht and Leinster, and the dogs followed him around the lands. He went off in the evening fishing, and the dogs followed him around the rivers. They would not leave his sight, and they wouldn't leave, but they were so meek. They never went near him. They wouldn't bark at him. They just loved him. They were loyal Irish dogs to Fionn McCool. Eventually he thought, I'm not going to get a man or an animal as loyal as these two dogs. So one night by the fire, he shook and he shook and he shook, and he took the two dogs and he hugged them close to see what would happen. He was shaken so badly, he didn't know what would happen, but the dogs just laid their heads down in his lap. These dogs were Fionn McCool's dogs for years and years and years, the loyalest dogs to him that you'd ever meet. They're in the stories, they're called Bran and Sceoladh is what he named them. The fairy Cleena had heard about the relationship with the two Irish wolfhounds, that they were living for a long time with Fionn McCool, and she thought, I have done wrong because I'm going to go back and see Fionn. And when she went back to see Fionn, he was so sad. Her friend was sad. He had never been sadder. He had a sad look in his face, pining for the day that his wife and baby would be found again. He didn't understand what had happened. And because they were friends and Cleena wanted him to be happy and she was in love with him, she changed the two Irish wolfhounds, Bran and Sceoladh, back to his wife and his new baby again. She thought, I can't be jealous. I want to make this person happy, and I will do everything that I can to have him with a smile on his face again. So that's what's happened to the story of Bran and his two Irish, of Fionn and his two Irish wolfhounds, Bran and Sceoladh. So I was wondering if you could ask your parents, have they ever seen a statue of Fionn McCool or Bran and Sceoladh anywhere in Ireland? Ask your family, ask your parents, because there's one of them on the Curra roundabout, and you'll see what a giant of a man Fionn McCool was. You'll see what big giants the two dogs were, and this could be some place that you might want to go when the lockdown is finished. So I thought what might be nice is that you could have a little jam jar or something like this, or even a little gift bag, and something to do with your family every dinner time. If you have any ribbons around your house, this is going to be your special jar, and this is for the lockdown. You can make up a jar with ribbons all around it, tie them around. And this is the special family jar. So what I would like parents to do is cut up tiny pieces of paper like this and put them into the jar at the snack table or the dinner table. And every time you would like to go somewhere in Ireland, this is going to be the aim, that when all this is over, we've somewhere to go and you've somewhere to talk about and what it's like. So I want you to write down on a piece of paper whereabouts in Ireland that you'd like to visit, and this is your challenge for today. Would you like to see the statue of Fionn McCool with his two Irish wolfhounds? It's on the Curra roundabout, and if you write that down, stick it into your jar on the dinner table, and you can talk about this with your parents.